You've reached Frontiers of Antiquity, a podcast exploring the places where civilizations collided, ideas traveled, and history changed forever. Thank you for listening.
So, I want you to just imagine standing in the blinding Mediterranean sun, right in the heart of ancient Jerusalem. We're talking roughly around 960 BC, right? And you are looking up at, well, really one of the most famous structures in all of ancient history, King Solomon's Temple.
Oh, absolutely. The ultimate symbol of ancient Israelite identity.
But, it's the absolute center of their theological and political universe. And the scale of this thing is massive. The gold overlay is gleaming. The air is just thick with the scent of burning incense and, fresh-cut cedar.
It would have been completely overwhelming to the senses.
Completely. But here is the massive historical twist that we are focusing on today. If you were to look closely at this temple, really analyze the carvings on the wood, the specific architectural layout, the colossal bronze work in the courtyard, you wouldn't just be looking at Israelite culture.
No, you wouldn't. Not at all.
No. You'd be looking at the undeniable, unmistakable fingerprints of an entirely different foreign maritime superpower.
And that realization it forces a complete reevaluation of how we understand this monument and, frankly, how we understand the ancient Near East as a whole.
Yeah, which is exactly why we're doing this deep dive today. We're drawing from some incredible historical and architectural analyses covering the Phoenician role in Solomon's Temple.
Right, because this structure wasn't built in a vacuum. It was the product of a highly complex, deeply integrated geopolitical landscape.
Exactly. We are taking the classic biblical accounts, mostly the logistical records in 1 Kings and 2 Chronicles, and we're cross-referencing them with actual archaeological realities excavated throughout the Levant.
And we're going to trace the full lifespan of this cultural exchange.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't just stop with the physical building.
Right, it morphs, doesn't it?
It does. It turns into this cornerstone of Western esoteric folklore centuries later. So the mission here is really to dismantle the myth of the isolated monument. We want to reconstruct the true story of how this was an epic international joint venture.
Yeah, we're tracking how a treaty between ancient Israel and Phoenicia birthed a legend that, honestly, remains perfectly intact in modern esoteric traditions today.
It's fascinating.
It really is. And I want you, the listener, to think about the physical objects around you right now, like the device you are listening to this on or the car you drive. You intuitively know those aren't made in a single location by a single society.
Right. They are the result of massively complex global supply chains.
Exactly. The glass is from one continent, the microprocessors from another. And the ancient world, surprisingly, operated on a very similar level of interconnectedness.
They absolutely did. A monument with the sheer scale and technical sophistication of Solomon's Temple, it simply could not manifest without an international supply chain.
So let's talk about that supply chain, because before we even look at the stones, we have to look at the geopolitical marriage of convenience that made it happen.
Right, the treaty.
Yeah. We are looking at a formal alliance struck between two specific monarchs, King Solomon of the United Kingdom of Israel and King Hiram I of Tyre.
Tyre being the preeminent Phoenician city-state at the time.
Exactly. And looking at their geopolitical positions, it's kind of like it's like a modern corporate merger where two companies have perfectly complementary assets.
Yeah.
Like a visionary tech startup partnering with this massive established manufacturing giant.
That is a brilliant analogy because ancient Israel, during this specific Iron Age window, they had just consolidated into a unified kingdom. And they had a massive agricultural surplus in the highlands.
Tons of food.
Tons of food. And they had sweeping ideological ambition under David and Solomon. But the thing is, they possess virtually no monumental building expertise.
Right. They were an agrarian and pastoral society.
Exactly. They didn't have the generational engineering knowledge you need to raise massive stone temples. They had the vision, the land, the capital, but completely lacked the architectural vocabulary.
And then you look at Tyre. Contrast that geographic reality. Tyre was this island city fortress on the coast of modern-day Lebanon.
The supreme maritime society of the era.
Master seafarers, unparalleled engineers, incredibly wealthy merchants. But, and this is the big, But their geography was intensely constrained.
Very much so. They were perched on a rock. They had almost no arable land.
Right. So they have immense wealth from their trade, like the famous Tyrian purple dye.
Yeah.
But they had a perpetual existential vulnerability when it came to food security.
They desperately needed a stable caloric intake to feed their dense urban populations.
Which creates this powerful mutual dependency. Israel holds the agricultural key to Tyre's survival, and Tyre holds the technological key to Israel's imperial ambitions.
And the scale of the economic exchange they set up is just staggering. Israel exported vast quantities of wheat, barley, olive oil, and wine down to the Phoenician coast.
And in return?
Tyre opened up its supply lines. They provided high-grade raw materials, timber, gold, bronze, but most crucially, they exported their elite, specialized human capital.
Workers.
Right. Tyre wasn't just shipping logs. They sent their master architects, their stone masons, their metallurgical engineers. They basically exported their entire cultural genius to build Israel's holiest site.
But wait, this brings up a massive theological paradox.
Yeah.
I mean, Solomon is building the permanent anchor for Yahwism, right? The house for an invisible monotheistic God.
Right.
But he deliberately outsources the entire design to a foreign nation with a completely different polytheistic worldview. He is baking the cultural DNA of the Phoenician pantheon right into Jerusalem. Isn't that an insane theological risk?
It seems like it to us. But this hits on a crucial distinction between modern and ancient statecraft. In the ancient Near East, the architectural language of prestige was universal.
Universal in what way?
Well, even though Israel kept a strict monotheistic theology internally, the way you signaled legitimacy and divine favor to other nations was standardized. To be seen as a real kingdom, your temple had to reflect the highest aesthetic standards of the day.
Ah, I see. So the pragmatic need to look like a real empire simply outweighed the theological risk of hiring polytheistic craftsmen.
Exactly. They needed the structural vocabulary of empire, and Tyre was the only nation that could speak it fluently.
Wow. And this integration didn't just stop at the construction site, did it? The treaty actually set up a joint maritime fleet.
Yes, down at Ezion-Geber on the Red Sea.
Right, near modern-day Islet. They combined Phoenician navigational supremacy with Israelite territorial access.
It was a geopolitical masterstroke. The Phoenicians dominated the Mediterranean, but they were totally blocked from the Indian Ocean by the Levant.
Right, they couldn't get boats across the land.
Exactly. So by partnering with Solomon, Tyre gets unimpeded overland access straight to the Red Sea. And together, their joint fleet, the ships of Tarshish, navigated down to the legendary land of Ophir.
Which is no small feat. Navigating the Red Sea back then required intense knowledge of seasonal winds and celestial navigation, stuff the Phoenicians had already perfected.
And the cargo they brought back from Ophir fundamentally altered Israel's economy. Massive influxes of gold, silver, ivory, exotic woods.
That joint venture didn't just fund the temple. It financed the entire royal quarter in Jerusalem. It transformed the city from a highland stronghold into a cosmopolitan center.
It did, but, having the money to fund a mega project and actually having the logistics to build it are two totally different things.
Right, the execution of this thing was a marvel.
Let's talk about the logistics, starting with the timber, the famous cedars of Lebanon.
Yes, essential for the structural beams and the interior paneling.
But these trees were located high up in the northern mountain ranges of Lebanon, completely separated from the rugged Judean hills around Jerusalem. How do you move a forest across the ancient world without truck or highways?
It required a highly sophisticated, multi-stage supply chain. First, Tyrian woodcutters fell these massive cedars up in the high-altitude forests. Then they engineered ways to get these gargantuan logs down the steep mountains to the coast.
Which is terrifying on its own. Ugh, incredibly dangerous. But once they hit the Mediterranean, they faced another problem. The logs are way too big for standard cargo ships.
So what did they do?
They bound the timber together into immense floating rafts. They basically made artificial islands of wood and used the coastal currents to sail them south.
They sailed rafts of timber all the way down to the port of Jaffa, which is basically modern Tel Aviv.
Right. But that's just the maritime half. Once they hit Jaffa, the timber has to be hauled overland uphill, ascending thousands of feet into the rocky Judean mountains.
I mean, we're talking pure human and animal labor. Rollers, ropes, just dragging tons of wood up a mountain pass. It's staggering.
And yet, the stone masonry required for the walls reveals an even higher level of technical genius.
Okay, here's where it gets really crazy. The historical records claim that during the assembly of the temple, No hammer, axe, or iron tool was heard at the site.
Right.
The entire stone structure was assembled in absolute silence. How is that even physically possible?
It sounds mythical, but it accurately describes a very real Phoenician architectural practice. This was Tyrian ashlar masonry operating at its absolute peak.
Explain ashlar masonry for us.
So the Phoenicians managed stone quarries miles away from the Temple Mount. In these quarries, they carved massive ashlar blocks, perfectly square, precisely dressed stones. But they didn't just cut rough blocks to shape later on site.
Right.
They pre-cut every single stone with microscopic precision right at the quarry.
Which requires insane geometric mastery. I mean, this isn't like snapping Lego bricks together where the studs guide you.
No, not at all. Ancient ashlar masonry relied entirely on gravity, friction, and perfect geometric leveling. They used a technique called anathyrosis.
What is that?
The edges of the stone are polished perfectly smooth so the joint is flush, but the interior face is left slightly rough. That way it grips the adjacent stone without needing any mortar.
Oh, wow. So if your calculations at the quarry are off by even a fraction of a millimeter.
The error compounds with every stone. The whole wall would fail miles away at the build site.
That is mind-blowing. The mathematical exactness to calculate load-bearing requirements and joint alignments from a remote quarry and then assemble it perfectly without a single strike of an iron chisel.
It represents the pinnacle of ancient engineering, and it actually fulfilled a profound theological mandate for the Israelites.
Right, because the Temple Mount was sacred space.
Mm-hmm.
The noise of iron tools of war and breaking the earth was considered profane.
Exactly. It would have disrupted the divine peace needed for Yahweh's dwelling. The Phoenicians provided the mathematical order necessary to maintain that sacred silence.
A strict religious requirement achieved entirely through foreign mathematics. It's a brilliant synthesis. And once these stones and cedar beams actually arrived, the architectural layout itself became a map of this cultural blending.
It did. The blueprint Solomon used wasn't a local Israelite invention. It heavily mirrored the classic Syro-Hittite and Phoenician tripartite design.
Tripartite meaning three parts.
Right. If you look at contemporary temples in the region, like Tel Teinat in Syria, you see the exact same structural DNA. It's a linear progression.
Walk us through that progression.
So first, you enter the Ulam, which is the entry porch. From there, you pass into the Heikel, the massive main sanctuary hall. And finally, the high priest alone enters the Debir.
The Holy of Holies.
Exactly, the elevated, windowless inner sanctum.
And that design isn't just a floor plan. It's a psychological journey. As you move from the Ulam to the Heikel and step up into the pitch-black Debir, the space gets tighter, more intimate, and honestly, more terrifying.
Architecture manifesting the experience of approaching the divine.
Right, and the Israelites adopted this exact spatial layout from their polytheistic neighbors. Now, the guy responsible for executing the interior design and casting the monumental bronze work is probably the most fascinating figure in this whole story.
Yes, Hiram the artisan.
Right, not to be confused with King Hiram.
No, this is Hiram the craftsman, sometimes called Hiram Abif, and he is the literal physical embodiment of this cultural exchange.
Because of his lineage, right?
Yes. He is the son of an Israelite widow from either Naphtali or Dan, but his father was a Tyrian bronze worker.
He has this dual heritage. He understands the theological gravity of his mother's people, but he has the elite technical mastery of his father's people. He's translating the aesthetic of a maritime empire into a sanctuary for the God of Israel.
He was a true polymath. Bronze, casting, goldsmithing, engraving, and the objects he created were just staggering. Take Jachin and Boaz, for example.
The two colossal bronze pillars at the entrance of the Ulam.
Right, and these weren't load-bearing columns holding up the roof. They were entirely symbolic. Massive cylinders of cast bronze crowned with intricate capitals of lilies and pomegranates.
They were cosmic markers, essentially framing the gateway to the divine, a concept deeply rooted in Phoenician and Egyptian architecture.
Towering, gleaming sentinels. But his real metallurgical triumph was the molten sea.
Oh, the molten sea is incredible. This was a massive bronze basin in the courtyard for ritual purification. The records say it held about 40,000 liters of water.
And it rested on the backs of 12 cast bronze oxen facing the 4 cardinal directions.
Casting an object of that sheer volume in a single piece, I mean, the command of thermodynamics required is almost incomprehensible for that era.
It would have required pit casting on a massive industrial scale down in the clay-rich soils of the Jordan Valley. They used the lost wax method, but scaled up to a terrifying degree.
So they build a massive clay core, coat it in wax, sculpt the details, and encase the whole thing in clay.
Right. And then you bake it to melt out the wax, but then the true danger begins. To cast 40,000 liters of volume, you have to smelt thousands of pounds of copper and tin all at once.
Because if you don't,
The metal cools unevenly and creates structural fissures called cold joints. You'd have hundreds of workers operating massive bellows, pouring crucibles of molten bronze in perfect, uninterrupted synchronization.
it's an industrial symphony, and Israel simply did not have the infrastructure to do that before the Tyrian alliance.
Not at all. And the interior of the temple reflected that same syncretic mastery. The stone walls were paneled with Lebanese cedar and then completely overlaid with pure gold leaf.
And Hiram the artisan carved the wood with these elaborate motifs, right? Palm trees, open flowers, and prominently winged cherubim.
And we really need to abandon modern imagery here. A cherub in the ancient Near East was not a cute, chubby baby with wings.
No, absolutely not.
A cherub was a terrifying, majestic creature, essentially a sphinx, a composite entity with the body of a lion, wings of an eagle, and a human face.
They were fierce divine guardians in Phoenician and Egyptian art. So by carving these massive gold-leafed sphinxes into the walls of the Holy of Holies to guard the Ark of the Covenant, Hiram is using the most potent universal symbols of divine protection available.
It is an absolute masterpiece of cultural integration. The God of Israel is worshipped in a sanctuary on a Syro-Hittite floor plan, paneled with Tyrian timber funded by Red Sea trade and guarded by Phoenician sphinxes.
It's incredible. Now, the physical temple stood for centuries, but the macroeconomic and institutional legacy of this alliance altered both civilizations long after the final beam was placed.
Absolutely. If we look at the bigger picture for Tyre, the alliance provided the stability they needed for imperial expansion.
Because of the food.
Because of the food. The guaranteed influx of Judean wheat and oil completely neutralized their vulnerability to famine. Their rearguard food supply is secure, their overland trade routes are open.
So they could focus everything outward.
Exactly. This economic golden age fueled their expansion across the Mediterranean, leading to massive colonies like Carthage.
Carthage, which eventually challenges Rome itself. So the agricultural wealth of the Judean highlands indirectly subsidized a Mediterranean maritime empire.
It really did. And for Israel, the legacy was institutional permanence. Before Solomon's megaproject, Israelite worship was decentralized, moving around in a tent, the tabernacle.
But by building a permanent, awe-inspiring physical epicenter, Solomon centralized the nation's identity.
He created an architectural anchor. It defined what it meant to be an Israelite. And that identity proved incredibly resilient.
Because even when the Babylonians breached the walls in 586 BC, right, they burn the cedar, shatter the stones, break apart the molten sea for scrap metal, but the concept of the nation survives.
The physical structure was annihilated, but the institutional framework and theological identity endured the Babylonian exile. The temple had transitioned from a building to an indestructible concept.
And the survival of that concept brings us to the final and maybe most fascinating phase of this deep dive. The Babylonians destroyed the stone and bronze, but the historical texts, the logistics, the measurements, and the figure of Hiram the artisan, they survived.
I survived, and over centuries of study, that history underwent a profound metamorphosis into mythology.
The half-Israelite, half-Tyrian bronze worker who cast the pillars is entirely reimagined. He transitions from a historical craftsman into the tragic central figure of a massive esoteric tradition.
Right. This really crystallizes in the early 18th century during the Enlightenment with the formalization of the folklore of speculative Freemasonry.
In this esoteric system, the historical artisan gets a new title, right? Hiram Abif.
Hiram Abif, the Grand Master Architect. And his operational scope is massively upgraded in the legend. He isn't just the master of metalwork anymore. He is given total structural, logistical, and moral oversight of the entire temple project.
The scale of his oversight in the legend is unbelievable. He is tasked with organizing an unfathomable workforce of 180,000 laborers.
And he doesn't just manage their physical work, he organizes them into a highly structured hierarchical system of architectural grades: apprentices, fellow crafts, and master masons.
He brings absolute order to an ocean of human chaos. But why? Why elevate a bronze caster to a tragic hero organizing hundreds of thousands of people?
Because within the esoteric tradition, building Solomon's temple ceases to be about a historical stone structure. It becomes the ultimate moral allegory. The temple is a metaphor for building a virtuous, perfected human soul.
And by extension, a perfected society.
Exactly. The whole philosophical framework hinges on the symbolism of the stone itself. In this tradition, unrefined human beings, people who haven't done the rigorous work of self-improvement, are called rough ashlars.
Like stones freshly blasted from the quarry face. Uneven, flawed, useless for building a stable structure.
Precisely. The goal of the Masonic system, guided by Hiram Abif's wisdom, is to shape those rough ashlars into perfect ashlars, smooth, morally upright individuals who fit seamlessly into a divine societal structure.
Hiram Abif is the ultimate guide in this refinement process. But the core narrative of the Masonic legend is a profound tragedy. It's a conflict between unearned ambition and uncompromising integrity.
The allegory states that before the temple is finished, Hiram Abif is confronted by a group of his own workers, specifically rough ashlars who refuse to undergo the arduous process of moral refinement.
These unfaithful workers demand that Hiram surrender the secret knowledge, the master's word.
The ultimate architectural and moral password. It would instantly entitle them to the wages and privileges of a master mason.
They want the reward without putting in the work. They want to bypass the grueling process of shaping their own stone. And when Hiram refuses to break his vow and surrender the secrets to unworthy people, they violently murder him within the unfinished temple.
It's an allegorical exploration of preserving virtue in the face of brute force. He chooses physical death over compromising his honor and corrupting the sacred knowledge.
The philosophical implications are profound. But what is truly remarkable is how perfectly this 18th century folklore maps onto the actual historical engineering practices of the ancient Phoenicians we talked about earlier.
It really does. The esoteric legend perfectly validates the physical history. Take the concept of the missing cornerstone and the interdependence of the work.
Right. We talked about Tyrian silent stonemasonry, how every block was pre-cut and measured miles away to fit a specific master plan. The structural integrity relied on a chain of exact math.
So if you lose the chief architect, the singular mind holding the geometric plan, the only one who knows how the pre-cut stones fit together, the entire project genuinely paralyzes.
You have thousands of perfect ashlars arriving, but without the architect's vision, you don't know the sequence. The work halting upon Hiram's death isn't just dramatic, it's an accurate reflection of advanced ancient masonry.
The allegory mirrors the physics, and this extends to geometry itself. The Phoenicians were globally renowned for their geometry, mainly for seafaring navigation.
Mapping stars, understanding angles to survive the open ocean.
Right, and in the esoteric allegory, Hiram Abif uses those exact same mathematical principles, the plumb, the square, the level, to establish order out of the chaotic nature of his 180,000 workers.
Geometry is the universal tool for imposing order onto chaos. Phoenicians use it to conquer the sea and the rugged terrain of Jerusalem. Masonic philosophy uses it to conquer the internal chaos of human ambition.
It's a seamless translation of a physical science into a moral philosophy.
There is one final, really poignant detail in the legend that ties us all back to the physical ecology of the ancient Levant. After they murder Hiram Abif, the ruffians hastily bury him in the rubble.
But his hidden grave is eventually discovered by his fellow craftsmen because the disturbed earth is marked by a specific, freshly planted sprig, a branch of acacia.
And the selection of the acacia tree is brilliant. If you study the flora of the ancient Near East, the acacia is a fiercely resilient evergreen.
It has this incredibly deep root system that lets it thrive in the most harsh, arid desert conditions of the Levant. Because it appears impervious to drought, it was an ancient symbol for the immortality of the soul.
By marking the grave of the Grand Master Architect with the acacia sprig, the legend makes a definitive statement. The physical body can be destroyed by violence, but the integrity and moral truth Hiram embodied outlives his death.
His honor survives the harshness of the world. Much like the acacia survives the desert, it's the perfect conceptual bridge.
It takes the historical reality of a Bronze Age collapse, a pragmatic treaty about exchanging wheat for maritime logistics, and the physical engineering of cedar and bronze, and elevates it into the stratosphere of human thought.
It transformed a literal stone building into a universally accessible moral framework. A magnificent feat of engineering became a symbol of human cooperation and the ultimate sacrifice for personal integrity.
The journey from history to myth is absolute. We started with two pragmatist kings figuring out how to feed cities and legitimize an empire. We looked at the grueling logistics of floating massive cedars down coastal currents.
The thermodynamic mastery of casting 40,000 liters of bronze and placing Phoenician sphinxes inside an Israelite Holy of Holies.
And finally, we saw how history eroded the memory of a historical bronze worker only to resurrect him centuries later as the immortal hero of a philosophy dedicated to perfecting the human soul.
It just shows that our most profound modern philosophies are deeply rooted in ancient physical realities. The brutal logistics of economic survival built the grand architecture of the divine, which then provided the vocabulary for the legends of human morality.
So here is something I want you to think about the next time you are walking through a major city. When you look up at a towering modern skyscraper, or you stand before a massive public monument, ask yourself, who actually built this? What unseen international cultural alliances, what immense global supply chains, and what quiet geopolitical compromises made that structure physically possible?
Right.
And thousands of years from now, when the digital records have degraded and the blueprints are lost to time, will the engineers who calculated the load-bearing steel and the laborers who poured the concrete be remembered merely as historical footnotes? Or will they, much like a Tyrian bronze worker named Hiram, be transformed by the generations that follow into the mythic immortal heroes of a completely new folklore?
That is a truly fascinating framework for viewing the monuments we build today.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the historical realities, the cultural syncretism, and the enduring esoteric legacy behind the stones of Solomon's temple. Until next time, remember that the historical record is often fragmented and obscured. But if you look closely enough at the architecture of the past, the fingerprints of those who actually built our world are always there, hiding in plain sight.